Dzień dobry, dobry wieczór. Debate today is going to be in English because our guests are all over the world. We are all connected between Czech Republic, Krakow and the state of New York. The reason for this international gathering is the publication of the collection of essays of Václav Benda, a prominent Czech anti-communist dissident, which is going to be published in Polish in next few weeks by the Center of Political Thought in Krakow, which is also the main organizer of the event under the auspices of Czech-Polish Forum. Our guests today are Professor Flagg from Skidmore College in state of New York, who is, among others, the editor of the essays of Václav Benda in English, the American edition of his essays, which appeared 3 years ago, I think. And our second guest is Alexandr Vondra, Czech member of the European Parliament, former Czech, or not former, former minister of various Czech governments, and also a former speaker of Charter 77 and a member of Czech-Polish Solidarity. Who was Václav Benda? Most of you probably heard about Václav Havel, the most important personality of Czech dissident movement. Václav Benda is the other great political thinker, a great political philosopher of Czech anti-communist opposition, along with Havel and along with Jan Patočka. You don't need to have a PhD from philosophy to be a political philosopher, I think. He didn't. But he is definitely not so well known as either Havel or Jan Patočka. Why he is not known so well? One of the reasons is probably kind of written into his collection of essays. Actually, there are very few essays connected with Poland in the edition, in the book. But one of them is the letter Benda sent to one Polish samizdat review complaining about their article on Czech opposition. And he complains that the Poles simply omitted the Christian or Catholic wing of the Czech dissident movement. And he's like waving his hand, hey, I'm here. I'm the member of of the Christian wing of the Czech dissident movement. So you should, update your knowledge about Czech opposition. Why the Poles omitted this part? Because I think the reason is that this Václav Benda and all the other Christian thinkers of Czech opposition, they somehow didn't fit into our picture of how the Czech intellectual should like. That doesn't fit the stereotype of the Czech as a kind of liberal and atheistic. So Václav Benda was somehow strange, somehow outside our image of how the Czech intellectual should look like. But I think, and the Center for Political Thought is convinced that his thought has a high relevance nowadays. So starting from Alexandr Vondra, you were one of the last speakers of Charter 77, just as Václav Benda was one of the first. He was a speaker in 1979. You were the speaker in 1989. Can you give us some personal memories which would help us visualize who was Václav Benda and what was his role in the Czech path to freedom?
Yeah, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I think, Maciej, you rightly pointed out about the general position of Václav Benda within the Charter 77 and then the overall dissident movement in my country. Maybe, you know, to put another light into that, I would say that Charter 77 consisted of basically three wings. One was, I would say, liberal in the original sense of meaning. You know, there was all the artists. Václav Havel was the typical example. And that was certainly very well known due to the position of Havel on the world stage. Second was the leftist wing, you know, reaching, you know, from people like Jiří Dinsbier, taking a kind of a social democratic stance, to the various, even Trotskyists like Peter Uhl, who are also very well known due to their connection to the Czechoslovak-Polish solidarity. And then is the third wing, which was on the right and which was mostly associated with the Catholic Church. And maybe the reason why it is not so much well known in Poland is also due to the fact that the Czechoslovak Catholic Church, at least in the Czech part of the country, was largely conquered by the communists, you know, with this movement of Pacem in Terris, which was very collaborant. So the Catholics, contrary to Poland, which, you know, use the church as a very important platform for the opposition as such, and then could enjoy a huge support, you know, especially after John Paul II or Karol Wojtyła became the Pope. In our case, it was a real dissident story. And Václav Benda was the most important among them by any means, due to various reasons. First of all, he was really radical in his anti-communist stand. Here was quite unique. The famous statement, you know, the communist for us Catholic is associated with the Antichrist, and we have to approach this as a Satan or Antichrist. So something what, you know, you could never heard about from the leftist people in the Charter 77. Secondly, he was very active in bonds. So there was this Czech analogy of KOR, so this Committee for Unjustly Persecuted. So it allowed him to get into contact with not just with the famous dissidents who were prosecuted, but also with a lot of young people once they were imprisoned or interrogated by the secret police. And certainly, and we will talk certainly more about this, he has developed this concept of parallel polis. So, you know, while the leftist part of the Charter 77, all those former communists or even the members of the Politburo who were exposed from their position after the Russian invasion in 1968, he did not expect anything, you know, from the Soviet Union. While the communists, they were always designing their dissident strategy according to the moves in Kremlin and waiting for, you know, Gorbachev or whatever. For Benda, it was the Antichrist. Even Gorbachev was an Antichrist. So his position was basically don't have anything in common with that kind of a regime. This regime is totally deplorable. And our duty is, A, to wait for the better geopolitical consequences, but at the same time, you know, it's a distant horizon. It's not what we would could expect to happen now. But now our duty is to work in a parallel society, to build this parallel society as a kind of a training ground for the future democracy. And here, it was something what made him very close to us, younger generation, because you know, maybe we were not so much active in the churches or whatever, but we hate the communists, the same like him, and for us, the dissent was a matter of our choice. For example, you know, I studied, I finished my studies at the university, but then decided not to promote my professional career within the communist system, but simply to say goodbye to those structures and to go into the underground. For example, in my case, you know, to be editor of the Samizdat magazine, as a my own internal decision to keep my freedom to act. And in this reason, Benda was a kind of an elementary teacher for us, because his concept of the parallel polis was something what we were doing in the underground already that time. So I think for me, of course, you know, I had a lot of memories meeting him, visiting his apartment or house. He was a chain smoker, so I will celebrate him during that conversation, even with smoking a cigarette. That's a privilege, you know, in this remote conferences, that you can do it even when the Americans or others are prohibiting us to do this elsewhere. So here I am in my home, like in front of my library. The same, you know, how I remember Václav Benda, you know, visiting him. It was a huge room full of books, full of cigarette smoke, and he was sitting in a chair and offering us his political and, of course, also legal advice, how to behave in the time of the communist darkness, in a way not to be fully defeated. So that's my living memory until today.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the flat of Benda family is a legendary place in the history of Czech dissident movement. Probably one of the most legendary places in 1970s and 1980s. But Professor Tyler, you didn't have a chance to visit Benda's room at that time. So what is the way how American scholar kind of comes across the forgotten Czech political thinker?
So I had in 2011 an anthology, a book, kind of collection of great anti-totalitarian writings came out. I edited this volume called The Great Lie, and I had included Benda's essay, the Parallel Polis, and Havel's essay, Power of the Powerless, a Patočka essay. So I had included some Czech thinkers, and then that summer I happened to be able to go to Prague, partly as just a birthday gift from my mother. But someone suggested that I should, you know, try to get in touch with some of the former dissidents, and so a colleague of mine who had a Fulbright in Prague put me in touch with the Institute for the Study of Totalitarian Regimes, and then I managed to get an invitation to the Benda flat and spent a few hours talking to Kamila Bendova and her son Patrick. And I have to say, hearing Mr. Vondra talk about the flat, I've been to the flat, and even though I wasn't there under communism, you can kind of feel the the history in that place still comes across when you're there. So it was a sort of an overwhelming experience for me listening to Camilla talk about she and her family's battles with the regime and Vaughan's and the charter. And as I was leaving the flat, I saw the Czech edition of Václav Benda's essays, and I just asked her. I said, "Has anyone talked to you about having this translated in English?" And she said no. And I said, "Well, let me do some research and see if I can make that happen." And it took a few more years than I thought it would, but eventually we were able to get a translator and to bring the book out in English.
Thank you very much. Actually, it is not by accident that Polish edition of Václav Benda goes after the American one. And it's not an accident that Václav Benda is returning to Central Europe via America, via the United States. One of the reasons is the fact that your edition of Benda caused quite significant debate in the United States, and this debate was, it appeared also in the Czech or Central European context via Rod Dreher and his book about the Benedict's option. Why you think that Václav Benda shouldn't be read just as a historical document, as a document of some period of history, which is long past? It's 30 years since our countries gained freedom. Why it should be, or should it be read as just a historical document, or is it something we should read as having an actual message for us in 2020?
Somewhere I was looking last night to try to find the quotation, but there's Hannah Arendt says somewhere that she thinks she wouldn't be surprised if a true understanding of totalitarianism is only possible long after these regimes have collapsed. And so I think the totalitarian temptation is something that will always be with us. And therefore someone like Benda, who lived it and fought it, is always worth reading. That we can never be confident that we've triumphed over that temptation completely. And I think so. His chief teaching, Mr. Vondra already alluded to it, but the importance, I think it's hard to overstate the importance of the Parallel Polis. He wanted to attack totalitarianism, precisely at the point at which it was most successful, which was what I would call the atomization of political and social life, right? That totalitarian regimes separate people from one another, they isolate people from one another, and so he thought the solution was to try to bring people together, in various arenas: the educational arena, the musical arena, the arts arena, wherever and whenever social life could be reborn. That would kind of reactivate people's political natures, and they would be able to resist and want to resist the kind of deadened world that they, had to live in every day. And so I think it's important too, because oftentimes the solution, or how to put it, people think it would be enough just to kind of emphasize the importance of human rights in a kind of abstract sense. And Benda, I think, thought more deeply about the importance of people as political beings. It wasn't enough just to declare people's human rights sacrosanct. It was also important to encourage people to enter social and political life, and to think of that as a kind of duty. And so it's a more I guess I would say a more ancient way of thinking about political life, right? Freedom has to be embraced as a concrete activity in the public sphere, not just a kind of You're not free if you just enjoy private rights and leave the protection of those rights to the government. I think he had a much more participatory, active understanding of freedom.
If I
Yep,
may
of course.
add something, Maciej, a couple, maybe a year or two ago, I had a chance to meet for the first time with Rod Dreher, who, and this book, Benedict Option, has been published also in my country. And, on the first touch, I was surprised how much Benda's philosophy, thinking, and even approaching the things became attractive in America. But then I reached the conclusion that it's not surprising at all for me, because if you see the current stage of the discourse in the West, in the US, in Western Europe, and if you are conservative and you see this avalanche of this progressive thinking with all their political correctness, with all their attacks against the traditional nucleus and composition of the society as we know it, the attacks against the families, attacks against the churches. If you see this wave of iconoclasm in the US, UK, and elsewhere in the West, if you see the promotion of this, new liberal world as the only available option for us, if you see all those outcomes of the cancel culture, it has the parameters of the communist thinking. It has the parameters of the communist thinking in the West, which does not have any experience with what does it mean living in a kind of a totalitarian society. And thus, if you are conservative, you are under permanent attack now. And, in the EU, it's everywhere. Just, those attempts to bash Poland. Poland is a normal free country with free election. And, they wanted to punish it because it has a conservative government. Then I do have an understanding that Benda's thinking, Benda's philosophy, and Benda's recommendation how to behave in the totalitarian society, that the current conservative man or woman can find a lot of inspiration to gain some optimism in the current defensive mood, which is taken by many conservatives facing this offensive of this progressivistic avalanche. So, yes, it's not surprising for me. It's maybe even a sign of certain hope for future, that the people, the right people, have the tendency to find the inspiration from the right thinkers of the past.
Okay, so the philosophical question. How it comes that the regime which preaches extreme collectivism, such as communism, how we can equate it with the system which preaches extreme individualism, as, let's say, current liberal order is preaching individualism and personal freedom. How we can equate it? Because you did it.
That's a good point. But look, this preaching of the individualism is not the only sign of the current development in the West. If you look at the current green, for example, politics, which is dominating. I'm in the European Parliament. Everything is now dominated by the green ideologies. So look, it has a strong parameters of the Marxist thinking. Promising some paradise on the earth. It has a kind of eschatology. It's even a kind of a religion in the secular society, and thus, it does not preach extreme individualism at all. And even those, the changes in the human rights, which we can see in the, let's say, last 2 decades, they are not they are not done in the name of the individual, but in the collective right, collective claims for the various minority groups. It has nothing to do with the original meaning of the individual rights like we remember them from the American Revolution. Those are much closer to the concept of the various collective rights adopted by the leftists, either since the French Revolution or just recently.
Professor Taylor, maybe the answer is this fragmentation or atomization you talked about, because that's very strongly present in Benda's writings. The fact that communism is a collectivist ideology, but in reality it leads to kind of extreme atomization.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I guess I would just add one more thing to Mr. Vondra's answer as well. There's a kind of radical autonomy, right, that undergirds the philosophy of communism. At one point in the Benda essays, I don't remember which particular essay off the top of my head, but he mentions, I think it's actually the essay about Joseph Zverzina, the priest. It's a short essay in the middle of the book. He mentions the line in Karl Marx where Marx says, the point of philosophy is not to understand the world, it's to change the world. I think that mindset, even though there's not a kind of comprehensive ideology that's the outcome of that mindset now in this sort of post-communist world, that mindset is still very present, right? I mean, it's a sort of the rejection that there's a natural order of things. So even though there's not a kind of comprehensive ideology that dominates the world or that dominates particular countries, I think ideological thinking is very much still present, right? This idea that you can come up with theories, in your private study and apply those theories onto political and social life, and that will fix things, right? I think that's what Benda was very much against, right? His understanding of politics was going out into the world amongst your fellow human beings and trying to listen to them and come up with concrete solutions to present problems. But he was under no illusion that he could or wanted to kind of change the natural order of things. And so I just think he was against the kind of ideological thinking that's still present today.
It's very interesting to read Benda's essay about family in the totalitarian system, which about the pressures the system puts on the family as a kind of last position, which was not conquered already by totalitarian politics, and it's interesting to read his writings on how totalitarian system infiltrates all levels of life, including family, and think, of course, about current politics, which are to much higher extent than anywhere in the past concerned with kind of intimate issues and family issues. This is also probably an important part of his heritage and how we should, or the part of the heritage we should look into as well. Yeah, but we did our deal of conservative complaining. What about ways out? Because I think that one of the most important points of Václav Benda is that the Parallel Polis is not a ghetto. He's not talking about closing in some, last stronghold of tradition and then fighting to the last man. But he's calling to go out and to find solutions to kind of recreate the community. What are the ways out? What is the common ground we can meet now? Because when we look at the Charter 77 or Polish Solidarity, for example, they were both based on a very wide alliance of very different ideological streams, movements, which are now very far away, very apart. Maybe Sasha Vondra can say something as an active politician.
No, look, I also remember Václav Benda as one of the most political person among all the dissidents who entered the politics immediately after the November Revolution of the 1989. And he did in a very traditional way of doing the thing. So advocating the role of the political parties, advocating the role of the political parties with a very clear defined ideological base. So, and then, given the fact that that time was, really fashionable, to have some kind of a movement. There were a lot of talks about the various third ways. So here Benda was pretty much convinced that we should develop in our country a standard political system which we know from the West. He himself established a political party which was called very traditional the Christian Democratic Party, like KDS. Perhaps due to two facts, that first the role of the Christians and Catholics here was not as strong and widespread as in Poland or in Bavaria or in Austria. The party was rather smaller and had a challenge, in competition, in particular after the transformation of the Civic Forum into the Civic Democratic Party led by Václav Klaus, because it clearly posted itself, ODS, on the right side of the political spectrum, so the same area where Benda was clearly heading on. So, but, here, beyond the ideology, Václav Benda has already also shown an enormous amount of the political realism in a way that he orchestrated the merger of KDS with ODS, not to divide the forces on the right. And look, since 1989, I have remembered a lot of examples of splitting the parties into more pieces, but do not remember so much good example or successful examples in integrating the two parties into one. And it was done by him very successfully. And it was done by a man who was very strong with regards to the ideas, the views, and even a forecasting into the future, but who was not so much strong in let's say, as a public speaker. You know, his skills as an orator were not his best. And so it was really clear that he's gonna to lose something if he's going to merge. But he did it in the interest of the parties on the right. And I think that the subsequent development proved him that he was right, because let's say all this era between 1990 until 97 has been dominated on the Czech political scene by the right. And due to his contribution, we have won a lot of issues like lustration, like restitution of the property, and all those were acts which has enormously contributed to building a strong middle class, or reviving the middle class, which has been destroyed by the communists. So, and I think that the role of the middle class, together with the clear orientation in this situation by the people like Benda and Klaus together, that was a key element of the Czech Republic as a success story all over the 1990s.
Professor Taylor, maybe you can add something. I mean, renewal of the political community is a very important topic in Benda's writings, and he speaks about renewal almost in religious terms, but he was conscious that people like him, religious Christians, were a very tiny minority in the whole society. How he connects those two things, this urge to renew and the consciousness that he is just a minority?
Yeah, I guess I would just reemphasize firstly, you know, what I said about avoiding, I guess what I'll call ideological politics. You know, this idea that you can come up with these abstract ideological programs in advance and then apply those. I think Benda always wanted to emphasize, start with the concrete present reality, talk to whoever you need to about how to engage with that reality, and that will enable you to move things forward politically. I guess the other thing I would say, and I'd be curious about Mr. Vondra's reaction to this, you know, in addition to what Benda says in his essays, I think we can also learn a lot from who he was and kind of how he behaved both under communism and after. You know, one thing that comes out in the book, I think, and also from my interviews with Camilla and others who knew him, is that he was always able to avoid these two sins, one pride and the other despair. And I would say these two sins are constant temptations, especially for conservatives, right? I mean, on the one hand, you have the temptation towards this kind of self-righteousness that you know, the world is moving in this progressive direction and everything is terrible, but I alone am this pure, you know, righteous person, and so it could lead to a kind of isolation, you know, just a total rejection of the world. And the other ones that conservatives just love to wallow in despair, and that can be incapacitating, and it can lead to a kind of nihilism. And so I think Benda, in a way, avoids both of those things by being humble, but also being willing to engage with people who he knows don't share his political beliefs. So Mr. Vondra alluded to his close working relationship with Peter Uhl in Vons, this Trotskyite, you know. So it always struck me as incredibly important that those two diametrically opposed political figures were able to be the leaders of this really important organization, you know, through the late 70s and 80s. And so I think Benda embodied this, genuine conservatism. He did not shrink from his Christian principles and from his beliefs, but he combined that with this kind of openness and humility that I don't think you often see. And so putting those two things together, I think, is important.
Thank you very much. Probably last question from me. Václav Benda very often stresses culture and schooling, education, when talking about Parallel Polis as kind of main areas where the Parallel Polis should work most on those issues. But when we kind of try to think about conservative politics after 1989 in Poland, in Czech Republic, but also I think to some extent in the United States, education and culture are the spheres where right-wing politics are not existent actually, or at least in our region, and that conservative parties are very hesitant to take, for example, the Ministry of Culture or the Ministry of Education under when they are at the government. They kind of very eagerly gave them away to the liberal left-wing parties. Why is it so? Why, on the other hand, we know that it is important, but on the other, we just try to not to deal with it. We concentrate on those hard political issues, economy, defense, and so on.
I think it's one of the biggest mistakes which we are doing. And I remember this perfectly when I was taking part in the last time the government after the elections. It was after the elections in 2010. I was in favor in having the Ministry of Education for our party, but because of those affinities towards defense or finances and others, we gave up on the education to this third party called Public Affairs, and since that it's a misery after the misery. And it's a mistake because universities, schools, they are in particular targeted by the leftists, and they are working with our youth since the beginning. You could already see this impact and influence among the young generation in our country. So, Maciej, you are perfectly right. And if you say, if you want to find some inspiration in Benda's texts, I have found this, trying to quote now what he has said in 1987. Our language has to be yes, yes, or no, no. And then he continues, I'm aware that the possibilities of the Parallel Polis are limited and that successfully breaching those limits is conditional on a change in the global situation. At the same time, however, history teaches us that although irregularly, with iron necessity, favorable global constellation do come about in which small nations cease to be mere slaves to their destinies and have the opportunity to become their active architects. In a recent period, that opportunity has presented itself to Czechoslovakia at least 3 times, in 1938, 1948, and 1968. However, all of those historical opportunities were lost in a pitiful, painful manner. Therein lies the strategic scope and long-term task of the Parallel Polis. In the moment of the crisis, it is our clear speech that will be heard, not the confused and the defensive stuttering of the government. End of quote. So, look, I think this is exactly our task, even with regards to educating the next generation.
Professor Taylor?
Yeah, there's an essay in the collection called "A Besieged Culture." There was I think a questionnaire that was sent from a Western scholar to lots of different Czech dissidents on the question of culture in the mid 80s, and so "A Besieged Culture" is Benda's response to that. And yeah, and I mean he just emphasizes the importance of the cultural sphere and kind of reconnecting to you know, to the cultural life of one's place. I mean, he always emphasized you know, the importance of place, you know, the importance of language, and the importance of making that cultural heritage a kind of living reality in people's minds. And so the world of the underground seminars and the Samizdat publications, I mean, those were incredibly important to him and incredibly important to him because they showed that people still had a hunger for this kind of from this kind of thing, especially in the startling conditions of totalitarianism. And I think he would say that the challenge, you know, after '89 was much the same. You had to reconnect people to their cultural heritage and emphasize the importance of literature and music and all of it. And, you know, that was a natural thing for a conservative to do and a conservative to think. So, yeah, I don't think he would have been happy with the kind of emphasis on what you called the sort of normal conservative spheres of economics and defense. I think he would have counseled exactly the opposite.
Especially if we view a current situation which is defined by the alliance of big capital and the let's call it new left. It's very visionary from Václav Benda, I would think. My idea is that the Zoom seminars should not be too long in order for people to be able to watch them. So I would just ask you if you want to add something at the very end.
I think where we can also try to find an inspiration is this, because beyond the strengths in ideology and in its position towards the principal issues, he was also a very skilled tactician and pragmatics once he was in the Czech politics after '89. And simply, you know, just knowing, you know, the structure of the Czech politics, he was always in the minority. But being in a minority, he was able to harvest a maximum effect. And just, for example, our legal system and constitutional system is a part of, you know, we should credit him too. And, you know, with the invasion of those populists like Babiš, you know, which is the acronym for this unity of the left and the big business, you know, with all his money, he was not able to defeat the Czech constitutional system. And this constitutional system will survive, I have no doubt, this kind of attack which we were exposed to in the last couple of years. And the fact that we will survive, I would credit Václav Benda and his family, because his son Marek is now the chairman of the Constitutional Committee in the lower house, and he's among the first defenders, successful defenders of our constitutional system. So the ability to gain the maximum out of a minority position sometimes, it's something what I really admire on him, and where we could find an inspiration in the times when we are not taking a majority side too.
Thank you. Professor Tyler, why should Polish readers buy a book by Václav Benda? In few sentences.
I guess I would just emphasize something I already said, but maybe put it slightly differently. I was always struck in some of my interviews with the Czech dissidents that very few of them thought that they would see the end of communism in their own lifetimes. Yet they continued their dissident work, and whether they said so explicitly, embraced a kind of Christian hope, I suppose. And I think that's possible because of this combination of the virtue of magnanimity and humility. You know, two things you wouldn't think could go together, but you know, this kind of self-assertion, self-confidence, you know, willingness to do the hard work and hard thinking to confront the totalitarian regime, and also enough humility to know that you have to make allies and make friends with whomever you can, and not be certain that you have all the answers. And so again, I think that mindset is something that conservatives can learn from, especially today, where I think a lot of us are given to a kind of despair that, you know, Benda certainly never allowed himself to wallow in. So, under much harsher conditions, obviously.
Thank you very much. I really loved this sentence by Professor Taylor about avoiding the sins of pride and despair as a main goal of conservative politician. And if just this sentence remains from this discussion, it will be, in my mind, it would be great. Thank you very much. Once again, the collected essays of Václav Benda from his dissident period will be out in Polish in next few weeks, published by the Center of Political Thought, also the organizer of this debate. I would like to thank our two speakers, Alexandr Vondra in his house in North Bohemia, I think, yeah?
Goodbye, yes.
And Professor Taylor in the state of New York, in Skidmore College. Our debate was organized by Center of Political Thought in Krakow, and I wish you all nice or the blessed Christmas period, and all the best in the new year from Prague, Czech Republic. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.